You know what's terrifying? A skilled manipulator can map your entire emotional landscape in less than 7 minutes. Not 7 hours, not 7 days, 7 minutes. That's the average time it takes for someone trained in psychological exploitation to identify your deepest insecurities, catalog your traumas, and design a custom strategy to control you. And here's the part that'll make your skin crawl. They're doing it right now in conversations you think are harmless. A 2019 study from the University of Amsterdam tracked professional con artists and found they achieved an 87% accuracy rate in identifying psychological vulnerabilities within the first 10 minutes of conversation. 87%? That's not luck, that's a system. I've spent years studying forensic psychology, analyzing interrogation transcripts, and interviewing both victims and perpetrators of psychological manipulation. And I'm about to share something most therapists won't tell you. Manipulators aren't smarter than you. They're just paying attention to things you've been trained to ignore. They're reading a language written all over your body, your voice, your word choices, signals you're broadcasting constantly without realizing it. Think about your last conversation with someone new, a coworker, a date, someone at a party. You thought you were just chatting, they were hunting. And by the time you walked away, they already knew exactly which buttons to push, which wounds to press, which parts of you to weaponize later. This isn't paranoia, this is pattern recognition. And after this video, you'll never have a casual conversation the same way again. You'll see the hooks, you'll feel the probes, you'll recognize the moment someone stops talking to you and starts mapping you. I promise you that. The question is, are you ready to know what you've been missing? Because once you see it, you can't unsee it, and you might not like what you discover about yourself in the process. Let me take you inside the mind of someone who does this professionally. Not the Hollywood version, the real thing. In 2003, psychologist Robert Hare interviewed a convicted fraudster named Marcus, who had scammed over 40 people out of their life savings. When asked how he chose his victims, Marcus said something chilling. I don't choose them. They choose themselves. They tell me exactly how to hurt them within minutes, and they don't even know they're doing it. Hare recorded these sessions. What he found became the foundation for understanding predatory social behavior. Marcus described his technique like a doctor describing surgery. Clinical, precise, emotionless. He would start every conversation with what he called the empathy test, a simple question designed to make people reveal their emotional baseline. Something like, "You look tired, rough day? Watch what happens next." Most people, when given permission to complain, will immediately jump to their biggest current stressor: job problems, relationship issues, financial anxiety, health concerns. They think they're just venting. They're actually handing over a roadmap. Marcus would listen for specific linguistic markers, verbal tics that indicated unhealed wounds, past tense verbs when discussing relationships. "We were happy" instead of "we are happy." That's a crack. Qualifying statements. "I'm fine, but..." Everything after the "but" is the truth. Defensive explanations for things nobody questioned. "I'm not broke" or anything when nobody asked about money. That's a wound screaming to be noticed. Here's where it gets darker. The most effective manipulators don't just listen to your words. They watch your body tell the truth your mouth is hiding. A 2015 study published in the Journal of Nonverbal Behavior analyzed micro-expressions in speed dating scenarios and found that people unconsciously touch the parts of their body associated with their deepest insecurities within the first 3 minutes of conversation. Someone insecure about their intelligence will touch their temple or forehead. Someone with body image issues will adjust their clothing or cross their arms over their stomach. Someone afraid of rejection will touch their throat or neck, unconsciously protecting their vulnerability. The manipulator sees this. You don't. They're building a file on you while you think you're just nervous. Marcus called these invitations. Your body literally invites the predator to strike specific targets. And the truly skilled ones? They'll validate those insecurities immediately, not to comfort you, but to establish trust. "You look great, by the way," right after you adjusted your shirt. You're clearly smart. After you touched your temple, you feel seen, understood, safe. You just let a wolf through the door because it complimented your curtains. But there's a layer beneath this that's even more disturbing. Manipulators don't just identify wounds. They intentionally create small ones to test your healing responses. Psychologist Martha Stout, author of The Sociopath Next Door, calls this pity fishing. They'll tell you a sob story early in the relationship, something designed to trigger your empathy response. A sick relative, a betrayal by a friend, financial hardship. It sounds like vulnerability. It's actually a diagnostic test. They're measuring how quickly you rush to comfort, how much emotional labor you're willing to provide, how easily your boundaries dissolve in the face of someone else's pain. If you pass their test, meaning you overfunction emotionally, you've just been marked. You're exploitable. Research from the University of British Columbia found that highly empathetic people, those who score high on compassion metrics, are 3 times more likely to be targeted by manipulative individuals precisely because their healing instinct overrides their self-protection instinct. Your kindness isn't a virtue to them. It's a vulnerability, a door left unlocked. Now here's the thing that'll make you paranoid for the next week. This isn't just happening in romantic relationships or with obvious con artists. It's happening in your workplace, your friend group, your family. A 2021 study published in Personality and Individual Differences found that approximately 4% of corporate executives display clinically significant levels of psychopathic traits, and they use these same scanning techniques during hiring processes, team meetings, and performance reviews. They're identifying who can be pressured, who can be isolated, who will crack under specific types of stress. That colleague who always asks about your weekend with just a little too much interest, they might genuinely care, or they might be cataloging your pressure points. Your boss who remembers that offhand comment you made about your parents 3 months ago? Impressive memory, or strategic data collection. The friend who always knows exactly what to say to make you feel guilty. Emotional intelligence, or weaponized empathy. The manipulator's greatest trick isn't making you trust them. It's making you distrust yourself. They'll remember things you don't remember saying. They'll quote you back to yourself with slight distortions. You said you were overwhelmed, remember? When you said you were busy? You told me you didn't like him when you said you had concerns. They're rewriting your memory in real time, making you question your own perception. Psychologists call this gaslighting, but that term has been so overused it's lost its horror. What's really happening is memory warfare. They're editing your internal narrative to make you dependent on their version of reality, and it starts in that first conversation when they just want to get to know you better. But here's what really keeps me up at night. After studying hundreds of cases, analyzing thousands of hours of recordings, interviewing both survivors and perpetrators, I've realized something that fundamentally changed how I see human interaction. The techniques manipulators use? They're not special. They're not secret. They're just amplified versions of social skills everyone uses every day. We all scan for emotional information. We all adjust our behavior based on what we learn about people. We all use strategic vulnerability to build connection. The difference is intent. A friend uses these skills to understand you better. A manipulator uses them to control you better. And sometimes, the only difference between those two things is what they decide to do with the information after they've gathered it, which means the person doing this to you right now might not even realize they're doing it. They might think they're just being friendly, interested, caring, and maybe they are. Or maybe they're running a program they don't even know they installed. Think about that the next time someone you just met seems remarkably interested in your life. Ask yourself, are they connecting with me or are they mapping me? Because there's a difference. And that difference matters more than you think. But recognizing the mapping? That's only the first step. Understanding what they do with that map once they've drawn it, that's where things get truly disturbing. So they've found your wounds. Now comes the part that turns my stomach every time I see it in clinical records, the installation phase. This is where manipulators stop being passive observers and become active architects of your emotional reality and the blueprint they're working from. It's the one you handed them in that first conversation. Dr. George Simon, a clinical psychologist specializing in manipulative personalities, spent 15 years documenting what he calls impression management tactics. He found that skilled manipulators operate in 3 distinct phases after the initial mapping. Phase 1, mirroring. Phase 2, escalation. Phase 3, exploitation. And here's the thing that makes this so insidious. Each phase feels like it's happening naturally, like the relationship is just deepening organically. It's not. It's being constructed. Deliberately, with you as the raw material. And let me show you how mirroring actually works, not the pop psychology version you've heard about, but the clinical reality. In 2008, researchers at the University of Groningen conducted an experiment where they trained actors to mirror the emotional expressions and verbal patterns of participants during 30-minute conversations. They found that mirroring increased perceived trustworthiness by 64% and made participants 89% more likely to share sensitive personal information. 89%, just by reflecting back someone's own patterns. Now imagine someone doing this with intent, someone who's already identified your specific wounds. They don't just mirror your body language, they mirror your pain. You mentioned your difficult childhood? Suddenly, they had a difficult childhood too, with eerie similarities to yours. You talk about feeling misunderstood at work. They've felt exactly that way. They understand you in a way nobody else does. This isn't coincidence. This isn't even empathy. It's strategic alignment. They're making themselves into a mirror that reflects your pain back at you in a way that feels like recognition, like finally someone gets it, someone sees you. And that feeling, that relief of being understood, that's the hook setting in your mouth. But here's where it gets psychologically sophisticated in a way that honestly terrifies me. The best manipulators don't just mirror your pain, they mirror it imperfectly. They leave small gaps, little discrepancies that make you want to explain more, to be understood more completely. It's a technique interrogators use called strategic misunderstanding. You say you're stressed about money. They say, oh, you're worried about being poor. That's not quite right, so you correct them. No, it's not about being poor. It's about not having enough saved for emergencies. My parents lost everything when I was 12, and I swore I'd never feel that helpless again. See what just happened? They made you dig deeper into your own wound. They made you perform emotional archaeology on yourself. And now they know it's not about money at all. It's about control. About the trauma of watching your parents' security collapse. That's the real wound. Money is just the scar tissue. A 2017 study in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology found that people share 73% more personal information when they feel slightly misunderstood than when they feel completely understood, because the drive to be truly seen overrides our self-protection instincts. Manipulators exploit this mercilessly. Now we're in phase 2, escalation. This is where they start applying pressure to the wounds they've identified, not to hurt you yet, but to see how you respond to pain. Think of it like a dentist probing for cavities, except the dentist is looking for cavities they can create, not fill. They'll make small comments that brush against your insecurities. If they know you're insecure about your intelligence, they might say something like, "That's an interesting way to think about it," with just the slightest condescending edge. If you're insecure about your appearance, they'll compliment someone else in front of you, with just a bit too much enthusiasm. These aren't accidents, these are tests. They're measuring your reaction time, your defense mechanisms, how much pain you'll tolerate before you push back. And here's the truly sinister part. They're also training you. Every time you don't push back, every time you swallow the discomfort and make excuses for them, you're teaching them that this level of pain is acceptable. You're setting your own boundaries lower and lower without even realizing it. I need to tell you about a case that haunts me. In 2012, forensic psychologist Dr. J. Reed Meloy analyzed the relationship patterns of a woman named Sandra, who had been systematically financially and emotionally exploited by a partner over 7 years. When Dr. Meloy reviewed recordings of their early conversations, therapy sessions, written correspondence, he found something chilling. In their third conversation ever, Sandra had mentioned in passing that her father had been emotionally distant and that she'd spent her childhood trying to earn his approval. Her partner, David, had seemingly brushed past this comment at the time. But Dr. Meloy noticed that from that point forward, David began implementing a pattern of intermittent reinforcement, giving Sandra attention and validation unpredictably in random intervals, making her constantly work for his approval exactly like she'd worked for her father's. This wasn't conscious strategy on David's part. He wasn't sitting there with a manipulation manual, but he'd unconsciously identified her deepest relational wound and had begun pressing on it systematically. By year 3, Sandra was making major financial decisions based entirely on whether they would please David. By year 5, she'd isolated herself from friends and family who didn't understand their relationship. By year 7, she'd lost her business, her savings, and her sense of self. All because in one early conversation, she'd revealed the shape of her father wound, and someone had learned to exploit it. This is what I mean by weaponized empathy. David probably thought he loved Sandra. He probably told himself he was being supportive, that he was helping her heal from her daddy issues. But what he was actually doing was reenacting her trauma in a way that kept her dependent on him. And this pattern, this specific exploitation of early attachment wounds, it's everywhere once you know to look for it. Research from the Yale School of Medicine found that in 78% of emotionally abusive relationships, the abuser had identified and exploited an attachment wound related to the victim's primary caregiver within the first month of the relationship. 78%. They're using your parents against you. They're using your childhood against you. They're reaching back into your earliest wounds and pressing on them until you confuse pain with love, until you can't tell the difference between someone hurting you and someone knowing you. And here's the thing that makes me want to shake people awake. You're helping them do it. Every time you overshare on a first date because vulnerability feels like connection, you're handing them ammunition. Every time you explain your triggers and traumas to someone you barely know, you're drawing them a map to your weakest points. I'm not saying you should be closed off or distrustful. I'm saying there's a difference between intimacy and intelligence gathering. Real intimacy develops slowly, with reciprocal vulnerability, with earned trust. Strategic information gathering happens fast, with one person asking all the questions and the other person feeling grateful for the interest. Think about your last few first dates, your recent job interviews, those early conversations with new friends. Who was asking the questions? Who was answering them? Who left knowing more? And who left feeling known? Because those aren't always the same thing. Let me give you a concrete example of how this plays out in workplace settings, because everyone thinks this is just about romantic relationships, but it's everywhere. A manager identifies during a casual conversation that you have an absent parent. Let's say your mother left when you were young. They don't need to be a psychologist to notice how you light up when they give you approval, how you work extra hours when they praise you, how devastated you are when they seem disappointed. They've found your mother wound. And now, unconsciously or consciously, they can control your entire work output by modulating their approval. You'll stay late without being asked. You'll take on projects nobody else wants. You'll defend them when other employees complain. Why? Because somewhere in your nervous system, their approval is registering as the parental love you never got. This isn't dramatic. This is documented. A 2020 study published in the Journal of Applied Psychology found that employees with unresolved parental attachment issues were 3 times more likely to develop what researchers called enmeshed professional relationships, where their self-worth became pathologically tied to their supervisor's approval. That's not loyalty. That's an unhealed wound being exploited for productivity. So what's the counter move? How do you protect yourself when you can't see the mapping happening in real time? Here's the uncomfortable truth. You learn to lie. Not malicious deception, but strategic privacy. When someone you just met asks why you're single, you don't explain your abandonment issues and how your ex cheated and destroyed your ability to trust. You say, just haven't found the right person yet, and change the subject. When a new boss asks about your background, you don't unpack your complicated relationship with your father and how you've always sought male authority figures who validate you. You give facts, not feelings. When someone uses that empathy test, you look tired, rough day? You don't download your entire stress inventory. You say, yeah, long week, and ask them a question back. You keep your wounds covered until you've had time to observe how this person handles their own pain, how they treat people who can't benefit them, how they respond when you set a small boundary. Do they respect it, or do they push? Do they get defensive, or do they back off? These are diagnostic tests you should be running on them while they're trying to run tests on you. But here's the really disturbing question, and I want you to sit with this for a moment. How many times have you been the manipulator? How many times have you gathered information about someone's insecurities and used it to get what you wanted, telling yourself you were just being strategic or that you really cared about them? How many times have you mirrored someone's pain to build trust faster? How many times have you pressed on a wound you knew was there, just to see if you could get a reaction? Because if you're honest with yourself, if you really examine your own behavior in relationships and negotiations and conflicts, you'll probably find moments where you've done exactly what I'm describing. Maybe not with malicious intent, maybe not even consciously, but you've done it. We all have. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable truth of all. The reason manipulators are so effective is because manipulation is just human connection taken too far, intimacy weaponized, empathy deployed tactically, and the line between understanding someone and exploiting someone, it's thinner than the width of your intention. Sometimes it's invisible. And sometimes you won't know which side of that line you're on until someone you love looks at you with fear instead of trust, and you realize you've become the wound you were trying to heal. So let's talk about the part nobody wants to acknowledge, the part that makes victims uncomfortable and therapists nervous. Some people don't just attract manipulators by accident. They seek them out, unconsciously, compulsively, like moths to flames that have burned them 100 times before. And before you dismiss this as victim blaming, understand what I'm really saying. Your nervous system doesn't know the difference between familiar and safe. If you grew up in chaos, calm feels wrong. If you grew up being manipulated, genuine kindness feels suspicious. If you grew up earning love through pain, someone who loves you without conditions feels boring, untrustworthy, too easy. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, one of the world's leading trauma researchers, calls this trauma reenactment. Your body is trying to master an old wound by recreating the conditions that caused it. Except this time, you'll get it right. This time you'll be enough. This time they'll choose you. Except they never do. Because you're not healing the wound, you're feeding it. I need you to understand something that took me years of clinical practice to accept. Some people can feel a manipulator in a crowded room. Not because they're perceptive, because they're resonating at the same frequency. There's a reason that woman keeps dating narcissists. There's a reason that man keeps getting exploited by business partners. There's a reason you keep finding yourself in relationships where you have to prove your worth. It's not bad luck. It's not a coincidence. It's pattern recognition at a level so deep it predates language. A 2018 study from the University of Toronto tracked individuals who had experienced childhood emotional abuse and found they could identify deceptive individuals with 71% accuracy in under 3 minutes. But, and this is crucial, they were also 83% more likely to engage with those deceptive individuals rather than avoid them. They could spot the danger and they walked toward it anyway. Why? Because danger feels like home. Because pain feels like love. Because being hurt by someone feels more real than being safe with someone. Here's what happens in your brain when you meet a manipulator and you have unhealed wounds. Your amygdala, the part that detects threat, it fires. You feel that little ping of anxiety, that sense that something's off. But here's where it gets twisted. If you grew up in an environment where love and threat were tangled together, where the people who were supposed to protect you were also the people who hurt you, your brain wired those signals together. Threat became indistinguishable from attachment. So when you feel that anxiety around someone new, that subtle sense of danger, your conscious mind interprets it as attraction, as chemistry, as intensity. You think, this person makes me feel something. What you're actually feeling is your nervous system recognizing a familiar threat pattern. And instead of running, you lean in. You tell yourself this time will be different. You tell yourself you can fix them. You tell yourself, maybe if you're good enough, patient enough, understanding enough, they'll finally see your value. But you're not in a relationship. You're in a reenactment. And the script was written before you could talk. Let me tell you about the most disturbing conversation I've ever had. I was interviewing a woman named Rachel for a research project on psychological manipulation in intimate relationships. She'd been through 4 abusive partnerships, each one escalating in severity. When I asked her about the early warning signs she'd missed, she said something that stopped me cold. I didn't miss them. I saw them. I just thought they were signs we were meant to be together. I asked her to elaborate. She explained that her father had been alcoholic, violent, unpredictable. She'd spent her childhood in hypervigilance, constantly scanning his mood, trying to predict when he'd explode, walking on eggshells, managing his emotions so she could survive. And every single partner she'd chosen as an adult had that same quality, that unpredictability, that edge of violence just beneath the surface. When I asked why she kept choosing men like her father, she looked at me like I'd asked why she kept breathing. Because that's what love feels like, she said. When someone is calm and stable and kind, I feel nothing. I don't trust it. It feels fake. But when someone is intense and complicated and I have to work to keep them happy, that feels real. That feels like I matter. This is the part where I'm supposed to tell you how to break the pattern, how to recognize manipulators and avoid them, how to heal your wounds so you stop attracting predators. But here's the truth. Recognition isn't protection. You can know exactly what's happening and still be unable to stop it. Because we're not talking about logic. We're talking about wiring laid down before your prefrontal cortex was fully formed, about attachment patterns encoded in your nervous system when you were too young to have words for what was happening to you. A 2021 meta-analysis published in Clinical Psychology Review examined intervention programs designed to help people break patterns of abusive relationships. The success rate, meaning participants who did not enter another abusive relationship within 5 years, was 34%. 34%. That means 66% of people who know they're in a destructive pattern, who have done therapy, who understand the psychology, they do it again anyway. Not because they're stupid, not because they're weak. Because changing your attachment patterns requires rewiring neural pathways that have been reinforced for decades. It requires feeling safe, which is the one thing their nervous system is designed to prevent. So, what do you actually do? How do you protect yourself when your own instincts are compromised? When the very signals that are supposed to keep you safe are drawing you toward danger? Here's the only strategy I've seen work consistently. And it's going to sound absurdly simple. You borrow someone else's nervous system. You find someone in your life who isn't wired the way you are. Someone who grew up safe. Someone whose danger signals actually work. And you run every new relationship past them. Not for advice, for data. You describe the person you're interested in. You tell them about the early conversations, the small red flags you're explaining away, and you watch their face. If they look concerned, you trust their concern more than your attraction. If they're saying, "This seems unhealthy," and you're saying, "You just don't understand our connection," you trust their understanding more than your connection. Because your connection isn't connection, it's recognition. And what you're recognizing isn't love, it's the shape of your original wound. But let's get tactical for a moment. Let's say you don't have someone whose nervous system you can borrow. Let's say you're alone in this, trying to navigate relationships and friendships and professional connections while carrying wounds you're not even fully aware of. Here are the concrete signs someone is mapping you for exploitation. Signs that should trigger an immediate threat response, even if they're not triggering one naturally. First, pace of intimacy. If someone is sharing deep personal information or asking for deep personal information within the first few conversations, that's not chemistry. That's speed running past your defenses. Genuine intimacy has a rhythm, a back and forth, a testing of boundaries. Manipulators blow past all of that because they need to establish false intimacy before your logic catches up with your emotions. Second, isolation attempts. If someone is subtly or overtly criticizing your friends, your family, your support system, if they're making you feel like no one understands us, if they're positioning themselves as the only person who truly sees you, that's not special connection. That's tactical isolation. They're cutting you off from reality checks, from people who might notice what's happening and pull you out. Third, manufactured urgency. If someone is creating artificial time pressure, we need to make this decision now. This opportunity won't last. I need to know if you're committed. That's not passion. That's preventing you from thinking clearly. Manipulators thrive in compressed time frames because rational thought requires space and time. Fourth, and this is the one most people miss, weaponized vulnerability. If someone shares a trauma or wound very early on and then uses it as a shield against accountability, "I know I hurt you, but you know about my past," that's not healing transparency. That's strategic disclosure. They're making their pain your responsibility, making you feel guilty for having boundaries, making you prioritize their healing over your safety. And here's the thing that makes this particularly insidious. It works. A 2019 study in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that people are 4.7 times less likely to enforce boundaries with someone who has disclosed past trauma, even when that person is actively harming them. Your empathy becomes their weapon. Your compassion becomes your cage. Fifth, reality distortion. If you find yourself constantly questioning your memory, if you're hearing "that's not what happened," or "you're being too sensitive," or "I never said that," If your version of events is being systematically undermined, that's not miscommunication. That's gaslighting. And it doesn't start with big lies. It starts with small distortions in those early conversations, reframing what you said, adding emotional context that wasn't there, making you doubt your own perceptions. By the time you realize what's happening, you've already ceded authority over your own reality. Sixth, inconsistent personas. If the person you're with in private is dramatically different from the person they are in public, if they're charming to strangers and cold to you, if you find yourself making excuses for why they treat you differently, that's not complexity. That's compartmentalization. They're showing you who they are when no one is watching, when there's no social benefit to being kind. Believe that person, not the one who performs for audiences. And finally, the sign that should make you run immediately, they make you feel crazy. If you're constantly confused, if you feel like you're overreacting, if you're apologizing for things that aren't your fault, if your gut is screaming danger but their words are saying love, trust your gut. Always trust your gut. Not because your gut is always right, but because manipulators operate by making you distrust yourself. The moment you start believing their version of reality over your own felt experience, you've lost, not the relationship, yourself. And getting yourself back, excavating your authentic responses from underneath layers of gaslighting and manipulation, that's the real work. That's the part that takes years. That's the part that makes you never want to trust anyone again, because trusting someone meant losing yourself. Here's my final thought. The thing I wish someone had told me before I spent a decade studying this. You will encounter manipulators. Statistically, inevitably, you will. Some will be malicious. Most will be unconscious, operating from their own wounds, hurting you while thinking they love you. The question isn't whether you'll encounter them. The question is whether you'll recognize them before they've mapped every vulnerable part of you. And the answer to that question isn't about intelligence or education or even self-awareness. It's about whether you've done the brutal, uncomfortable work of identifying your own wounds first. Because if you don't know where you're vulnerable, if you haven't mapped your own territory, someone else will map it for you, and they won't be gentle. They won't be careful. They'll press every wound they find until something breaks. Until you break. And then they'll act surprised. They'll say they didn't know. They'll say they were just trying to help. They'll say you're too sensitive, too damaged, too broken to be loved properly. And if you've given them enough time, enough access, enough of your reality, you might believe them. That's the real horror. Not that someone manipulated you, but that they convinced you that you deserved it. That your wounds made you unworthy of anything better. That the pain was your fault. Remember this. Healthy people don't go looking for your wounds in the first conversation. They wait to be invited into your pain. They earn the right to know your vulnerabilities. They don't treat your trauma like a treasure map. So the next time someone seems too interested too fast, the next time someone makes you feel seen in a way that's intoxicating and terrifying, the next time someone mirrors your pain with suspicious precision, ask yourself one question. Are they trying to heal with me, or are they trying to hurt like me? Because manipulators don't just detect your wounds. They inhabit them. They become them. They make you believe that pain and love are the same thing. And once you believe that, once that wiring sets in, everyone who doesn't hurt you feels wrong. Everyone who loves you gently feels suspect. Everyone who treats you well feels boring. And that's when you know the manipulator won't have to find you anymore. You'll find them. You'll seek them out. You'll choose them again and again and again until you finally understand that the wound isn't something that happened to you once. It's something you're still doing to yourself. Every time you choose someone who makes you prove your worth. Every time you accept pain as proof of connection, every time you confuse intensity with intimacy, the manipulator in your life right now, they didn't create your wounds. They just learned to play them like an instrument, and you let them. Because somewhere deep down beneath all your defenses and rationalizations, you still believe that love is supposed to hurt, that suffering is what makes it real, that being chosen by someone who's also choosing to hurt you is better than being alone. It's not. It never was. But knowing that and feeling that are two different things. And until you can feel it, really feel it in your nervous system and not just understand it intellectually, you'll keep walking toward the very people you should be running from. You'll keep handing your wounds to people who see them as opportunities. You'll keep confusing the person who knows how to hurt you with the person who knows how to love you. And that confusion, that tragic, devastating confusion, that's the manipulator's greatest achievement. Not getting inside your head, getting you to let them stay there.